Hi, so today I'm going to show off my city generator that I made for Maya. It's made using the Maya Python library. Um, so to open it, just run the script which is saved up there, brings up the main window. Um, so I'll just go through one by one the main settings. To start with, you've got the group name, so that's the name of the group that the buildings will be placed inside, which allows you to quickly quickly move the entire city. Next, we've got the layout mode, so that decides the positioning of each building. So random obviously just picks a random position within the given range. Uniform grid is placing each building equal distance apart, and then the width of each row of buildings can be set by the user. And then uniform with spacing variation is the same as uniform grid, except that there's a little bit of randomness in the distance between the buildings. So that one tends to look the most realistic, so I'll keep that. The city range slash row width is as I mentioned before, it's the width of each row of buildings. So by default, it's minus 1,000 to 1,000, which means that buildings will start being placed at minus 1,000, and then once they reach 1,000 in terms of positioning, they'll go back to minus 1,000, but move forwards on the z-axis to do a new row. So the building height, width, and depth ranges, these are just the lower bound and upper bound of the random values for height, width, and depth. Number of buildings goes all the way from 1 to 5,000. That's the ideal range because I've tried more than 5,000, and it tends to just slow everything down. It's taken me about 20 minutes to generate a 5,000 building city before, so that's why that limit's there. Next we have all the effects for the buildings. So when a building is created, it starts off as just a regular cube, which is then stretched to the random height, width, and depth sizes. And then if there's effects enabled, essentially based on the likelihood of that effect being applied, it will be applied to the building. So for example, if I enable add windows and set the percentage likelihood to 1, then that means that whenever a new building is generated, there's a 1% chance likelihood of windows being added. And obviously if you set it to 100, it means that all of the buildings generated will have windows. So you've got add windows, which essentially just selects certain faces on the cube and then extrudes them inwards to sort of create a fake window. We've got beveling the top edges, which just applies a bevel to the top edges. Scaling the top edges means that the top of the building either scales in or outwards. Rotating the building will rotate the entire building and any extra geometry that's been attached to it. And that's these three, which are the extra geometry. So you can add balconies to the side of the building, you can add a helicopter landing pad, or you can add billboards. And then these two effects work slightly differently. So you can enable it so that the buildings have an automatic UV applied to them. So that is the exact same as if you were to go to UV automatic. And then if there's any materials that you've added into the list that I'll show in a second, then it will apply those materials based on the list. So I'll show the material window now. So you have that enabled. Also the UV scale is just used to change the size of the UVs for each of the geometry pieces, so that you can scale your textures up or down. So if we open the material management window, I've got all these shader groups available. So that's because in the scene I have a lot of materials already in here. So how it works is it gets shader groups instead of just materials. So for example, how it would work is you say, right, for the main body of the buildings, I want them to be made out of bricks and cinder blocks and concrete and stained concrete. So you have those selected. You can control select multiple. You click add to the building list, and then when you generate the city, so if you have the effect enabled, then for each of the buildings, one of these materials will be applied, and that's randomly selected. So each of these individual lists affect a different part of the geometry. So glass, that is that's only used when the add windows effect is applied to a building. So if I get just these glass shaders that I've made, put them in there. Roof materials, let's just do that, and that. Helicopter pad materials, I've got one texture that I've made for those, and the billboards are there. Also, if you want to get rid of it, just click clear and it wipes the list. And then this list is saved automatically, so as soon as you're done you can just close that. And then so I'll turn on a few of these effects, turn the rotation down because it doesn't look great for a realistic city. Let's have that there, and then let's have that there. And then for time's sake, I'll just do 300 buildings, and then that I'll show off in a second. So once you have all your settings ready, you click create buildings. So the city's now generated. So if we get rid of that, we can go down and we can see all the buildings that are generated. So they all look slightly different because there's a lot of randomization going on. So for example, this one seems to only have the balcony effect added on. So you've got the balconies added on there. You can see the roof material is different to the main body. This one has balconies and windows. So you can see the windows are white because that's one of the shader groups that were applied. Ooh. This one's got a little bevel there. This one's scaled so it moves in a little bit. And then this one has a billboard added. See if, yeah. So I think I've used the wrong billboard shader group, but that's just an issue with me linking my not linking my textures up properly. I'll put a cut in here and show an example of what the billboards look like with the actual textures. You've also got helicopter landing pads in the scene. So they look like this, and then that's when they have the texture applied. So yeah, you have all those. This is the uniform with spacing variation layout. So you can see that the buildings are in a grid, but then the spacing is inconsistent, and that just makes it look a bit more realistic, the imperfections. So then when if you want to redo the city, you can just click undo, and then it deletes the last group. So to undo it, it must have the same group name as before. So now I'll show off the place buildings across uneven terrain effect. So you enable that, and unlike before where the buildings were placed flat on the ground, this lets you define a ground terrain or any piece of geometry, and when the buildings are generated, they'll be placed and then they'll snap to the closest position on that terrain. So for example, the buildings will still be placed at the coordinates defined by these values here, but then after that they'll snap up to the correct position on the uneven terrain. So I've got one I made earlier, just a plane with some bumpiness and subdivisions smoothing applied. So if I get rid of that and place that about here, you input the name of the terrain in. So this is just called uneven, and then I'll lower this a little bit so I don't need to wait as long as last time. Click create. Now it's having to check for the closest position, so it takes a little bit longer, but you can see that the buildings are placed and they follow the curve of the terrain. So if I move this there so that you can see it working with that little divot, so you can see they follow along the divot and match the curve. It's not perfect, as shown by this one, which is buried a little bit, but you can just pretend that it's fallen into a sinkhole or something. it tends to work best with not too extreme variations of the geometry, but that's something that I'm hoping to improve after this video anyway. So then in terms of the rest of the controls for the program, you've got randomize, which will just pick random values for the effects and randomizes whether or not they're turned on or off. I have it randomize the values even if they're disabled, so that if the user decides that actually I do want beveling turned on, you can just toggle it and then it's already got the random value. Randomization doesn't apply to the material or the uneven terrain effects, as well as the city range, just because those effects either need a bit more setup. So for example, adding the materials or having uneven terrain, or the user might need the buildings placed in a certain area for consistency's sake, which is why that's there. So the reset all values button, you click that, everything goes back to normal. That also impacts the city range and row width, so that goes back to normal. Another feature in the city generator is when you hover over items, there's a little bit of information available, so I'll highlight that now. But that just provides a brief description of what each of the effects and the sliders do. And yeah, that's the overview of how to use the program. So now I'll cut and show you how to install it. So installing the program is super simple. So first thing you need is the code. So if you just go to the GitHub page, there'll be a copy here. So you just click on that. If you click raw, it'll just take you to a web page with this. You can press Ctrl A and then Ctrl C to copy it. I'm going to copy mine from my editor just because I haven't updated the main branch yet, but that should be done by the time anyone sees this video. So now you have the code copied. You open up your script editor here. Make sure that you have the Python tab open, not the Mel tab, because that's a different language. This is some leftover Python code which hasn't been run because it doesn't work in Mel. So you have your Python tab, paste the code in. So once you have the code pasted, you need to open up the tab that you want to save it into. So it can be any of these. I'm going to save it into custom. I've already got one there, but I'll save it again. So have it in there. You do file, save script to shelf, and I'm going to name this CG2 just so I know it's different to that one. Name it whatever you want. It's literally just that label there. Click OK. So now the code is saved, so whenever you click that, it runs it, you get all of this up. And then yeah, that's my city generator.